It was the 15th year since the terrible catastrophe began. The world had changed dramatically. There were zombies and everything was heading towards the end of the world. To somehow feed themselves, people took absolutely any work. But unfortunately, the news that our hero heard today was not the most pleasant. The problem was that at the last vote, it was decided to expel his sister. Of course, given the fact how hard it was to find a job now, and generally survive in general, Michael didn't like it very much and started trying to work things out. Such a hard decision was made for two main reasons. The first, most important, is that the girl has tuberculosis, which is very dangerous for other workers. The second, she can't do anything useful. What's the point of spending limited resources on her? Then the boss asked how the guy could even think of raising his hand against his elders. When Michael realized that the situation was hopeless, finally he just asked where his sister was, in order to find her and provide her with some living conditions. The answer was overwhelming. As it turned out, the guys had left her to her fate somewhere in the mountains. Without wasting a minute, Michael immediately turned around and went to her, and instead of trying to help him, everyone started laughing loudly. Already being in the forest, the guy started shouting his sister's name loudly so that she could hear him and say something in response. At that time, the girl was sitting in some bushes, and she did not react on purpose, because she did not want to complicate her brother's life anymore. But since the guy as a child always won in hide and seek, even now to find Katerina he was not difficult. To be honest, despite her desire to disappear, the girl was mad to see him again. As suddenly a huge monster came out of the neighboring bushes and tried to attack the guy. Even at such a life-threatening moment, Katerina was not afraid to take a risk to save her brother, so she jumped up, pushed him away, and put her body under the monster's attack. As a result, Michael was saved, but in turn, Katerina lost consciousness and fell to the ground from her injuries. Of course, the guy couldn't just let it go, so he grabbed his sword and took the fight, which unfortunately he didn't manage to win. Michael blamed himself insanely for the situation, because if he had used the attachment system a little earlier, things might have been different. Then through a dream the guy felt that someone was trying to wake him up, and in a couple of moments Michael woke up in school at one of the lessons. The teacher, to put it mildly, was displeased with this disrespectful behavior, so he made a remark. When he looked around, he saw a classmate who had lost his life at the beginning of the apocalypse, which made him think that he had really gone back in time. The teacher also confirmed this with his story about the quotas that give a pass to the special zone. The special zone is a so-called safe haven in case of the apocalypse. Apparently the government really knew it was coming, but didn't say so openly, and just tried to do something to save as many people as possible when all this chaos started. As it turns out, the guy even has a system that will make his journey much easier. In his previous life he managed to send his family to a shelter, but unfortunately his mother lost her life in the first wave, and his sister, you know what happened to him, so this time Michael just has to get into the quota. At the very beginning of the apocalypse, Jordan had an advantage, namely a group of subordinates, so Michael and his sister had to join them, otherwise they could not survive. But unfortunately the cruel egoist treated them like slaves, beating and chasing them for every little thing. All this lasted until the awakened one came to the company. Then the guy had the first chance to see their power with his own eyes. The most important thing this time is to prepare well in advance, if possible to create your own group of people, to become stronger thanks to the system, and to protect your family. The first thing Michael decides to do is to go to the credit card company. Because the owner is not very conscientious, it wouldn't hurt to come and put him in his place. The first thing Michael does is to go to the credit card company, because the owner is not very conscientious. To be frank, he was generally cavalier, initially piled his victim with a lot of text about the fact that debts must be repaid on time, and then just began to strike, so to speak, to make his words better remembered. In general, people who fell into the hands of truly can be considered poor. By the way, the girl really turned out to be a strong spirit, because despite all these beatings, up to the last supported her opinion, and did not even think to accept the conditions of the bandit, as suddenly in the room suddenly rushes Michael, With only one kick, he managed to break the door. The owner of this underground business was, to put it mildly, shocked by this insolence, and first decided to ask who dared to break into his office without his permission. The guy, in turn, was a bit of a mouthful, so he simply called himself a superhero and pointed his baton in the direction of potential rivals. The bandit then assumed that the boy was probably in over his head and told his boys to explain to him as soon as possible in the language of pain that he should not behave so badly in the future. Of course they didn't mind, but as soon as they got close, they both got hit in the face with a bat. Then, without wasting a minute, Michael went straight to the main man and grabbed him pretty hard by the throat, thus making it clear that his head is fine. Since the situation was desperate for the bandit, he decided to ask why the guy was doing all this. In response, he said that he decided to collect debts, because this particular office owed him a substantial debt for another timeline. Of course, that answer confused the owner even more, and he didn't even know what to make of it. Michael then picked up his bat again and fought the guards once more, because in the meantime they had woken up and made the same mistake. As soon as the situation calmed down, the guy immediately ran to the girl lying on the floor to ask how she was feeling, and tried to help her. In principle, she was conscious, at least that's a good sign. Also, before he left, Michael remembered something. Specifically, the note of debt between the boss and the girl must be destroyed. Initially, the man started to pretend as if he didn't know anything, but when Michael threatened him with his bat, strangely enough, almost immediately he remembered everything and showed that it was on his desk. When the guy took in his hands this receipt, he was mildly shocked by the amount that was depicted there. But nevertheless, from that moment the girl no longer owes anyone anything, and already with a clean soul can tear up the document and throw it in the trash. In principle, so she did. Then the system sent a notification, which said that there was an opportunity to create an attachment with the next girl, Marina. But there is one problem: Marina still has not awakened, so her skill will not be obtained. In that case, the first thing to do is to help her do it. Meanwhile, it began to rain black rain outside, another sign that the end of the world was just around the corner. After Marina was finally able to awaken, she received a rank ability called Metal Manipulation. Consequently, Michael also received a rank S ability. Absolutely all awakened have a rank of abilities. As a rule, they belong to the 6 basic senses, and abilities above level S are basically dual senses superimposed on each other. At the moment, the screen shows all power levels from weakest to strongest. In his previous life, Michael had only gotten a rank D ability, because it was basically too bad, and in the end, it was only after a large amount of time that the guy managed to reach peak storm level. The same ability of the S level really felt different, and as soon as Michael was able to awaken, his power was close to the peak of the storm level. Marina then approached the guy and asked him why he had the same ability as her, and after a moment's thought he said that they were just the same. In fact, it is not quite so, primarily due to the numerous awards, which managed to get because of the system of attachment, but to tell Marina about it, of course, it is not worth it. After a while, the guys met up with an old acquaintance of theirs. This guy was aware that they had advanced abilities and unlimited prospects, so he encouraged them to join the military, which he thought would be the best choice. Out of politeness, Michael said he'd think about it, but in fact he already knew it wasn't really an option. He also emphasized that the quota for entry to the special zone was very valuable, so Marina should be very careful, because having such a ticket, a person becomes the number 1 target for all the bandits. In response, the girl began to smile, and said that she was giving her ticket to Michael. The man's surprise was unparalleled. How can you just give away such a valuable place that can't even be bought for $1 billion? Objectively, these two create the illusion that the precious space on a special military base is not really that valuable. As suddenly out of nowhere, on the horizon appear zombies, which bite other people, and thereby infect them. By the way, the look of them is quite frightening. Honestly speaking, Marina initially did not even realize that they are zombies, and thought that people just came up crazy and began to bite each other, also immediately notified Michael about it. As soon as the man noticed that something strange was happening, he immediately drew his service weapon and urged the infected to stay away from him. But since they are regular zombies, they have no ability to think with their heads, and as soon as they sense danger, they go straight to eliminate it. Eventually, this behavior caused the man to shoot, but it can't be said that it helped too much, because at this point he was already lying on the floor and about to be bitten. In order to save the day, Michael was forced to use his powers to attack all the aggressive zombies. In the end, after only a few minutes, the opponents were neutralized, the comrade was saved, and the environment became more favorable for life. The funny thing is that the zombies showed up before the black rain was over, so the initial infestation happened sooner than Michael could have imagined. As a friend on Michael's phone received a call, it was his mother. She said that the street is now too dangerous, so it is best not to go out there. She also added that literally just kidnapped his sister. This news, to put it mildly, shocked Michael. He could not understand why the events are developing so quickly. Well, in this case, there was no time to lose, so the guy reactivated his power and ran to save his sister, while destroying a whole bunch of zombies behind him. In general, at the moment, everything is not going according to plan, because in his past life, there was no such thing as someone kidnapped his sister. But if you take into account how many times at this point Michael is stronger than before, then we can say with certainty, he will not let anything happen to his sister. A large number of different skills that allow you to destroy the enemy to prove it. Meanwhile, Marina looked at all this from the side, and could not believe her eyes, because despite the fact that she and Michael have the same abilities, she realized that the guy is many times stronger than her, and for sure all that he is showing now, it is not the limit of all power. After a while, the guys did get to Michael's parents' house, and what a relief it was to see his mom safe and sound. Of course, the guy immediately ran up to her and started hugging her, because he was worried sick, and he was thinking about bad things all the time. After a few minutes of this hug, Michael promised his mother that he would find his sister, and asked if these people had left any messages. Anyway, before taking his sister out, they told Michael to come to one particular building, otherwise they would just destroy her. As it turned out, Marina was aware of the building in question. It was the property of a very high-ranking person. When Michael realized who he was talking about, he was mad because he had never encountered him in his previous life because he had lost his life at the beginning of the apocalypse. Before starting the process of searching for his sister, Michael asked his mom to pack his things so he could take her to the shelter, and preferably do it as soon as possible. To be honest, he was starting to feel guilty for relying too much on information from his past life. But this one was different. So if Michael really wants to protect his family in the future, he has to be more careful, otherwise it could lead to irreparable consequences. Then, while his mom is packing, the guy goes to Marina and starts asking her everything she knows about these people. Then when the boys got to the defense line, Michael told his mother that he had one more place to go, and as soon as he rescued his sister, he'd have her sent here to keep you company. It'd be a lot more fun for the two of us. Also, before leaving, the guy urged his mom not to worry, because now he's awakened, and saving the world is his job. In the end, with tears in their eyes, the guys finally said goodbye and the front door to the defense station slammed shut with a huge bang. On the way back, Marina did not give up hope to extract from her companion as much information as possible about what this black rain and crazy people. But Michael behaved like a real partisan, and until the last did not want to admit that he knows anything about the situation in the world. As suddenly there was an explosion not far from the guys, constantly occurring unforeseen situations. To put it mildly, pushed the guy on negative thoughts that today everything will not be so easy as it would be desirable. Then they found a girl who was burning with bright flames, and ran straight towards them. As it turned out, it was one of the strongest warriors of the apocalypse, the Queen of the Flame, Tatiana. Now it is very interesting to know what she forgot here and why so purposefully trying to escape. Is there some monster, which is much stronger than her? Deep down the guy realized that if he can get close to her, he will become many times stronger. Unfortunately, in his previous life, Tatiana just passed by for supplies, perform a task, so the guy then did not manage to communicate with her, but this time he is definitely not going to miss such an opportunity when she is right in front of him. Suddenly a new crowd of zombies appeared on the horizon. Of course Michael went into full alert, and Tatiana in turn did the same. With her fire, she tried to burn them all at once. But unfortunately they were too many, which purely physically does not allow to give the right amount of fire on each of them. But as they say, it's no big deal when you have such a powerful awakened as Michael. This time, to impress Tatiana, he decided to go all out, and literally started to smash absolutely everyone, just to get attention, and it worked out more than well. At one point the guy got into a bad situation, because he was too much involved in what was happening in front. He forgot to look back. During this time some zombie got too close and was about to infect the guy, but Marina came to the rescue. Thanks to her strength, she was able to lift a huge heavy object and drop it right on the monster before it could do its dirty work. To be honest, she was overjoyed at that moment, because it was the first zombie she had ever destroyed, and it was so beautiful too. But nevertheless it's too early to start relaxing. Quite a lot of zombies were destroyed, but in their place came even more, which means that something must be done about it, otherwise, at one point the forces to resist them may begin to be insufficient. In principle, this is what the guys began to do. Each of them had their own task, which perfectly coped with it. And after a while, the guys could breathe a sigh of relief, because there were no zombies left on the horizon. To be frank, Tatiana was shocked by the power of these two guys. She guessed they were both at the peak of the storm level, which gave them incredible strength. As soon as the opportunity arose, the guy immediately approached her and asked how she was doing. The girl replied that everything was fine, and Michael decided to introduce himself, so they shook hands, and the system sent a notification in which reported that the possibility of binding with Tatiana has been reached. At the same time Marina was playing with life-deprived zombies. For some reason she found this activity quite amusing that at one point she got so engrossed that she couldn't tear herself away from the process of drawing, right on her head. Michael, meanwhile, was trying to make use of his new skill. But when he realized that he was not very good at it, he asked the girls to wait for him here, while he secluded himself and did his business. Going to the nearest shopping center, the guy tried again, but only by exerting even more force. Strangely enough he succeeded. Now fire is his second main skill. After that he even tried mixing skills, and ended up with something incredible. Namely, now flying objects could leave fire streaks with them, which looked really cool. Basically ignition, along with metal control, adds at least plus 10 damage to a weapon. From this Michael assumed that he could have already risen in level, because if compared to what was just 5 minutes ago, they are completely different forces. In the meantime, Tatiana came up to Marina and asked what she was doing, but when she saw it for herself, she didn't ask any more questions. Then, since Tatiana is considered a savior, she asked what the guys were doing here, because this is a very unsafe place, and it is better not to go outside at all. Instead of answering the question normally, Marina asked her a counter-question in which she said that Tatiana was also on the street, so it was rather silly to ask her. As it turned out, the girl had simply become estranged from her teammates, and was currently trying to find them, but unfortunately it was not so easy. Since the answer was quite clear and understandable, Marina also decided to tell us why they were here. Her reaction, of course, was overwhelming. It was hard to believe that she really cared that much about the guys she was seeing for the first time. Unfortunately, Tatiana couldn't help any information, because she hadn't been to that side of town yet today, but she knew one thing for sure: the street was full of crazy people. Such a radical narrative made Michael very wary. Could it really be that bad? When suddenly, right before the guys were about to leave, Tatiana shouted out that she was going with them. At first the guy didn't know what he meant, but then he thanked, on behalf of his sister, for the future help. On the way, Michael gave for Marina one small gift, namely a box of lipsticks, as he said a great color, but used them a little later, because at the moment the guys need to go, and as soon as possible. The girl was insanely pleased, because it had been a long time since anyone had given her a present. After a period of time they finally managed to get to the office, also finally stopped this black rain. Tatiana even suggested that now zombies will be an order of magnitude less. Since Michael experienced this story not the first time, he knows firsthand that the cessation of rain does not symbolize something good. And even on the contrary, things can get several times worse, because in the past life after the end of the rain came the real beginning of the catalytic period of the end of the world, which means the transition in zombies to a new higher level. This makes them stronger, and forces them to put more effort into destruction. But let's not talk about the bad stuff, let's go inside the office. The first thing that confuses you when you walk in is the absolute silence, although there are definitely people here. As the guys consider themselves honored guests, they decided to use the elevator to get to the top quickly. Unfortunately, it was not possible to find out exactly what floor the enemies are on, so it was decided to go up to the top, and in case they are not there, gradually descend to the floor below and also carefully check it. When the elevator came down, even inside the guys were waiting for a little surprise, in the form of zombies. In any case, there was no time to be very upset, so not long thought they took the fight, also a unique opportunity for Michael, to use his new skill, and learn to use it as effectively as possible, so those who left the zombies in the elevator can only say thank you very much. By the way, the team worked as smoothly as possible, everyone knew his place and his task, which in the end allowed much more effectively destroy the opponent. We can say with certainty that this is the work of real professionals. In the process, the girls even had time to compliment each other. Tatiana was really too hot for this world, and Marina wasn't too far behind. The girls have also experienced that the zombies have really leveled up, because even after they've been burned, they still keep going. But good thing Michael was nearby, and could always help the girls in emergency situations, because at the moment his strength is far superior to the zombies, even though they have increased in level. Also after the help, he never forgot to remind the kids to be careful, because no matter how it is, these monsters are dangerous. Of course, they were very pleased that Michael shows signs of attention, but nevertheless, these words refer more to Tatiana, because Marina, too, with a great desire can cope alone, using a couple of her secret abilities, which she shows only in extreme cases. The little activity of the Flame Queen is due to the fact that she is very young, and does not have much experience in battles, so far Marina is doing the job instead of her, despite the fact that she has just awakened, as in her previous life just works wonders, showing very good results on the battlefield. As soon as the first wave was over, the guys even managed to relax a little, but just a few seconds later zombies appear on the horizon again, which symbolizes that the second wave begins. Since it makes no sense to fight them all the time, something had to be thought of. As a result, in that short period of time, Michael could think of nothing better to do than to go to the elevator and call the girls with him, having previously destroyed a few more monsters. Tatiana was desperate, to say the least, because her theory that there would be fewer monsters after the rain ended had been disproved. She also compared the way she was prepared for this day, and what is actually happening. As a result, the conclusions were not long in coming. Because what is happening at the moment, the military and law enforcement agencies completely failed to predict, according to their assumptions. To hold the monsters should have been easier. Also, as the boys went upstairs, Tatiana speculated that, in fact, the whole office thing might be a trap. Anyway, at this point, Michael was more worried about where his sister was than whether or not it was a trap. Just as long as she was safe. The boys stood in the slowly rising elevator. Impatient Michael activated his mysterious energy, causing his hands to glow blue, which magically sped up the elevator, illuminating its doors with a shimmering light. When the friends took the elevator to the top floor, they ran into trouble. When they got out, they found zombies again, who had already been defeated by a monster in armor with a sword. Stunned, they returned to the elevator, where Tatiana, with anxiety in her voice, asked what to do now. Marina looked at Tatiana in bewilderment, as she suddenly grabbed her head and began to scream. At the same time, Michael, preparing himself, fought a new enemy, whose scream echoed off the walls of the corridor, and as he flew toward the elevator, his body ran out of air. In general, This creature is a clear example of how soon will look like all zombies. Here it is clearly understandable that they have armor, and they themselves have become much stronger. At least it confirms the fact that the monster managed to make a hole in the metal elevator. Against this background, Michael had a very interesting question: how it happened that zombies so early entered the period of growth, because in the previous life it happened much later. But before looking for an answer to this question, it is necessary to defeat the opponent, so the guy urgently asked the girls to leave the elevator. To make it possible, Michael made another hole, so the guys easily climbed out. But of course, you can't hide from such a strong creature, so immediately after climbing up, Tatiana used her skills and threw a huge barrage of fire at him. But even so, the monster didn't feel much discomfort. Instead of trying to get away from the fire, he went straight for it, and stretched his arm forward to get Tatiana. Michael did not stand aside at the same time, and when he saw that it was getting hot, he attacked in time and saved the girl. Also, after the danger was over, our hero decided to show what a gentleman he is, and asked Tatiana if she was all right. When the girl replied that everything was fine, Marina attacked next. Using her powers, she squeezed the elevator with the monster in it into a round ball. After that, she threw him down with a huge force. I really want to believe that this will help the confrontation, but considering the opponent's armor, the chance to cause him some damage is quite small. But at least the guys were really shocked that Marina could do such a thing. Meanwhile, on one of the floors, also against the zombies, fought some awakened, and to speak frankly, he felt more than well. No panic, no nerves, but only clear performance of his task. As suddenly he heard that in the office there was someone else besides him. For some reason, to put it mildly, he wasn't very happy about it. In the meantime, the boys continued to fight the monster. Michael immediately warned his girls that it would not be easy to destroy it, so a good option would be to get out of the elevator shaft, thus organizing a more acceptable battleground for themselves. But as soon as they wanted to take a breath and get some rest, the monster was already on the floor, and immediately ran to attack, and judging by his red, greedy eyes, you can see at once that he will fight to the last. Nothing can make him change his mind. At the moment the guys were even a little confused, but nevertheless there was nowhere to go. Initially Marina again tried to stop him with the remnant of pieces of metal from the elevator, but this time it did not work at all. The monster had no problem demolishing everything with his hands and moved forward with an aggressive look. Of course, Michael could not even think that so soon he will have to face the zombies of the growth period. But no matter how you look at it, the guy is not what he used to be, so he has nothing left but to take this fight with dignity, and finally defeat his opponent, rather than constantly running away from him. First he created 2 fire swords, with which he tried to strike a decisive blow, but unfortunately even this did not help, because the armor is too powerful, and almost in the same second patched all the wounds for the monster. Then Michael realized that the power had to be used a little differently. In order to make sure that the enemy would get damage, the guy made a fiery fist, and gave him a precise blow right on his face, as a consequence of which his face looked not so serious, but more simple. Also he flew a few meters away, and caught fire with bright flames. When Tatiana saw what happened, she was surprised to say the least that the power of the flame could be used in such a way. She didn't even know about it. To be honest, Michael was sure that it was 100% over, but even though the damage was so enormous, the monster still kept on attacking. At this time, the girls were not just standing on the sidelines, but actively watching the fight, and at one point suddenly made a joint attack, the essence of which was to send a huge metal, fiery needle into the opponent, and hit exactly in the solar plexus. When the girls saw that the opponent is still standing on his feet, decided not to stop there, and continued to actively attack, only this time they were already aiming at the heart, and hoped that the needles at one point will still be able to penetrate his armor, and reach their goal. By the way, in the heart of the guys were aiming for a reason, because even in the growth period, these monsters still have a weak point is the heart, so except for hitting there is no way out. But unfortunately, even now, instead of winning, they had to face new challenges. When Tatiana saw that things weren't quite going according to plan, she got a little tense, but Marina was even more motivated to fight on and then paint it. In the meantime, Michael realized that with his current strength, cannot do critical damage to this zombie, as suddenly on the horizon appears the same man who fought on the other floors. Instead of just saying hello, he expressed his displeasure that the guys cannot defeat one monster. As it turned out later, the girls knew him quite well, the name of this mysterious operating Captain Frank. He is an awakened level of indignation. Tatiana immediately said that they would definitely talk about everything only a little later. For starters, she urged Frank to help them out. Of course, such beauties cannot refuse. Even so, the man basically came here for the sole purpose of helping, and to be frank, he acted as if he would right now to deal with this monster in just a few seconds, but the guys still warned him that the opponent is not weak. Frank it did not stop at all, because he just madly loves to break hard things. Probably even if he knew that he would lose, he still would not give up at least the opportunity to try to overpower the opponent, and of course to break through the thick layer of armor. In the end, the first blow, despite the fact that it was really powerful, absolutely did not change the course of events. The monster did not feel it at all, and on the contrary even smiled as if he was just tickled, but Frank still did not despair, and tried to attack again, only more seriously. This time the opponent still felt the blows, and even fell off his feet. Anyway, Frank has already made an incredible contribution to this battle, because with the help of strong punches, he managed to destroy the armor zombie in the chest area. Now the guys had almost complete access to the heart of the opponent. Of course, it's a chance that can't be missed, so Michael gets up from his seat, and he's going to make a surprise attack while he has the chance. The girls, for some reason, were not so active, but still the boy urged them to wake up and help him attack as soon as possible. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Frank is losing, to put it mildly, and he needs help, otherwise, his opponent will literally swallow him whole right now. Of course, he aimed exactly at the heart, and hit just perfectly, after which, to be sure to end this confrontation, decided to attack from above, and thus make a decisive blow, completely finish the monster, and be sure that he will never rise again. When everything was successful, the monster started the process of self-destruction. Initially it began to study the bright light from all possible holes, and then exploded, unfortunately, because of its armor, on a bunch of small particles that did not fly apart, but will not be able to resist. At the same time, Frank watched from the sidelines, and concluded that Michael was really not a bad fighter. As Marina approached her potential drawing board, who was insanely upset because it was completely burned out and no longer usable for drawing. At the first opportunity, Tatiana turned to the captain and told him that he had behaved too impulsively and had almost lost his life. In response, the guy smiled and said that the girl did not appreciate him, because at that moment he had not even warmed up yet. Roughly speaking, it was just the beginning. Then Michael came up to the guys and asked the girl who this man was. She quickly introduced Frank, emphasized that he was a flood-level awakened man, and then proceeded to introduce the guys to each other, which they were very happy about. In the process of acquaintance, Michael realized that the name Frank is not familiar to him, but his power is far from the weakest. Now the guy is tormented by the question of whether he can bind him, and get the opportunity to use this power. Unfortunately, the system sent a notification saying that the binding failed. This is a direct indication that this guy's heart is much more wary than it seems. Also, Frank recognized that his new acquaintance is really very strong, and for the sake of interest offered in his free time to fight among themselves, to which the guy kindly agreed, because in the future it may help to get attached. After Tatiana suggested that they should notify the bureau as soon as possible, because the black rain had stopped, and those madmen in the streets still hadn't come to their senses. Frank replied that the bureau was already in the circle, and added that those people weren't really people anymore. Michael suddenly broke into their conversation and asked the guys what they meant by the word bureau when they said it. Tatiana was visibly nervous, and Frank said there was nothing wrong with telling Michael about it, because the secrecy program had long since run out of steam. In this case, it did not take long for the girl to get to the story. In general, Frank and she are actually employees of the Bureau of Special Security. This is such an official organization, designed to regulate the civilian awakening. By the way, the guys were mildly surprised that the guy hadn't heard of such a service. And Michael, in turn, was surprised that there was any official regulation of the awakened at all. But if you think about it logically, of course there is, because after all, not every person who passes through is mentally stable, and can do a lot of damage. After putting everything together in his head, the guy realized that the Special Security Bureau was directly connected to the Sixth Senses Society. Until that moment, he didn't even know they were connected. He couldn't get his head around the fact that these groups were specifically designed to contain the zombie apocalypse. The whole situation also suggests that Tatiana, the Queen of the Flame, was originally a representative of the Sixth Senses Society. But in any case, it didn't make any sense to dwell on it too much. So the guy decided to ask Frank if he had seen any other humans. Unfortunately, he's never seen anyone. There's no one else in the building except the crazies. That's unfortunate news, because it's a direct indication that the sister's probably not there either, even though she's the only reason the guys came here in the first place. At least for now, Michael refused to believe it, and went back to the office to still try to find her. After all, not for nothing those guys appointed this very place. In no case cannot reduce this situation to nothing, because the sister disappeared first precisely because the guy was reborn. It was also really stupid to try to follow his old memories, considering that the guy had changed the current events. When suddenly, quite by accident, on his way Michael meets a body. It was lying face down, and from the outside looked very much like Anna. We can only pray that it is not her. After a few minutes, with tears in his eyes, the guy finally pulled himself together and turned the body face up. The result really pleased him, and after a very funny, because at least his sister is definitely not so scary, so you can exhale with relief, and a little relaxed. Well, apparently the sister and everyone else left here before the place went down, due to the massive zombie invasion. Then, since Michael hadn't been back for too long, Tatiana decided to find him, and ask him if he had any luck finding his sister, or at least any trace of her being here. Unfortunately, the guy couldn't answer any of these questions positively. The only thing he could think of was that the bandits and his sister had escaped somewhere before the zombies came. Tatiana was a really good girl, because she was genuinely worried, and tried to help in every way she could. When suddenly Frank came up to the guys and said something very interesting, that he might know where the sister might have gone. Well, an alien energy vibration from the awakened flood level came here before anyone else, so Frank came here to investigate it. If Michael's sister was in the building, she is most likely with the awakened at this very moment. Frank then explained that he has a unique ability to track where the awakened are within a certain radius, using a mobile app on his phone, a real pro at doing so. Meanwhile, Anna was indeed, along with the rest of the hostages, near the awakened man. At this point, the guy who was escorting them showed by example what could happen to them if they misbehaved, or even worse, tried to escape. But be that as it may, all hostages are really valuable materials. This awakened one hurts a lot every time he breaks one of the people in this way, so please behave with dignity, and do not under any circumstances bring it to this, because in the end no one will feel better. By the way, this purple-haired guy's name is Tyler. Then 3 doctors come into the room and inform him that the experimental equipment is completely ready, and you can already start using it. Well, in this case it was decided not to lose a minute, and prepare for the start. Each doctor took one hostage and began to lead them out in an unknown direction. Tyler in turn asked where his friends were, and after the answer he went to the 2nd floor. Also before he left, he urged the doctors to make everything as professional as possible. When Anna was brought into the operating room, she immediately saw not the most pleasant picture, namely a man who was chained to the table, and had certain features associated with his body. After that the girl was put on the table, and slowly began to tie up. Meanwhile, Michael and his team were getting close, at least as evidenced by the beacon on Frank's phone screen. The guy also felt the vibration coming from this very spot. Since every minute counted at this point, the guys went straight inside. For some reason, the living room was as quiet as possible. Tatiana even decided to ask Frank if he was sure that someone was really there. In response, he said that if you don't believe him, at least believe in science, because right now it clearly says that within 20 meters of the awakened. Michael, in turn, was also more in agreement with Tatiana, because judging by the layer of dust on the tables, we can assume that this place has not been inhabited for a long time. At this point, even Frank began to doubt, and shouted at the whole room, "Yes, how is this possible? In any case, we need to study the area in more detail." The guy, instead of normally focused on the task, and begin to properly explore the area, still could not stop thinking about how much still in his past life he did not know. Most of all, he can be the fact that the government knew about everything in advance, and the ordinary people told everything very superficially. Michael was also beginning to suspect that Frank must be hiding something else that would be pretty good to know about, but for now it was just a suspicion, and it was far from certain that this was the case. After about 20 minutes of searching, Frank asked everyone to stop, and said that there was no point in continuing, because the place they were looking for was already here. "But how do you explain the fact that the awakened one is nowhere to be found? It can't be somewhere in the ground or in the sky." This theory made Michael think, because the beacon couldn't just show this place, there must be a basement. So he pointed his finger at a certain spot, and asked Frank to try to penetrate the floor to see if there was a basement, or not. Of course, in no case to refuse, he did not, and immediately began to fulfill such an interesting request. Tatiana was shocked, to say the least, because the fact is that at the moment the guys are engaged in the fact that they damage other people's property. According to the law, actions of this kind are strictly punished. In the end, the ceiling was not able to be removed from the first blow, but the guys could feel it starting to sag, so it was decided not to stop there and try to remove it at least a few more times. Meanwhile, the guys who were sitting downstairs were talking among themselves and trying to understand why they were kept here. Their reasoning lasted until the ceiling began to collapse right before their eyes, and then a huge hole was formed. When Frank got downstairs, he made a brilliant deduction and told everyone that there was indeed something down there. Then, walking a little farther away, they noticed two men lying on the floor, at which point they were as frightened as possible, and asked who had come to see them. Michael, without question or ceremony, picked up the fire spear, called the two men the kidnappers of her sister, and threatened to kill them for it. Suddenly, right in the middle of the room, a bolt of lightning started flashing. Of course, everyone in the room took notice, and at the same moment, from the exact opposite direction, a huge rock was thrown right at Frank. But since the kid's an awakened man of very high caliber, you can't catch him with a childish trick like that. In fact, he had experienced countless sneak attacks in his life. Surprisingly, after what had happened, Tyler expressed his respect and called Frank a really strong awakened man. By the way, this time the bandit was not alone, but together with a girl named Katerina. She is also an awakened level attacker. Tyler was also excited to finally meet the dog, who had been following him all this time, because he'd been waiting for this meeting for quite some time. In response to this insolence, Frank announced to the entire room that they had bad breath, and added that she wouldn't mind rinsing it out with her fists. Meanwhile, the guys who were lying on the floor told Michael that it was the same people who stole his sister, and they had nothing to do with it. Because they're just hostages lying in wait like the rest of us. In which case the boy turned to them at once, and for the time being politely inquired where his sister was. Tyler made a strange look on his face, called the girl in question a material person, and added that she must have already lost her life, because she had recently gone in for a procedure. After these words, the guy started to panic. He just couldn't believe what he had just heard. Even when he had another chance to live his life, he still wouldn't be able to change Anna's fate. Also, to completely destroy morale, the thugs added that the guys had come just in time to take her body away. They decided to attack, having made a small plan beforehand, so that Tatiana would use the fire to distract the attention from her. The idea was that Tatiana would use the fire to draw attention to herself. Marina jumped on top of her rival, and tried to strike him with some very heavy thing with metal inserts inside, screaming for him to go to hell for all his misdeeds. Frankly, it was a good plan, but unfortunately, Tyler's no ordinary man either. So he was able to easily block Marina's powerful blow. The long-range defense was so strong that the stone pillar couldn't even penetrate the thick layer of armor by an inch. Then with this defense, Tyler was even able to attack, so Marina was extremely lucky, you could say. Meanwhile, Frank, to somehow help his partner, used a skill called Blood Berserk of the 4th level, and was about to attack, but suddenly, right below him, someone broke through the concrete floor, grabbed his legs, and with great force began to try to drag the guy downstairs. In the end, the one who tried to do it was so strong that he actually managed to finally break the floor and drag Frank down with him. At that moment Tatiana was standing next to him, but unfortunately she couldn't help, because everything happened too fast. Meanwhile, Marina continued to fight with Tyler. The man threw his armor, launched some tentacles to use them to wrap around the girl and try to drag her directly to the sharp objects. It would seem the situation is almost hopeless, but the girl was certainly not going to give up. Since these tentacles in the armor made no bigger than a hole, Marina realized that this was just the perfect opportunity to attack, and eventually make the hole several times bigger. When the guy saw something very sharp approaching him very confidently, he started to panic, to put it mildly. As a result, against the background of strong fear, Tyler began to put on the full, which led to not very good consequences, namely, he still managed to hurt the girl, and quite badly. He even managed to relax a little bit, but it wasn't the end. Because even for such an extreme case, Marina had a trump card up her sleeve. As they say, it was time for revenge. Meanwhile, Michael slowly began to come to his senses, and to realize the fact that now was not the time to dive into his thoughts, because at least his friends were in trouble and needed help in the fight. That's why he activates his abilities right now and runs to attack. Katerina noticed the new participant almost immediately and of course was very interested in trying to stop him, so she used her skills to create a ball lightning bolt and sent it straight towards Michael. Since the guy can move very fast, so far he has no problem dodging these attacks. Tyler has also asked Catherine to stay out of it. After all, this is his fight, and he has a great desire to settle this matter on his own. At one point, a rope quietly appeared from the ground, where Tyler was standing, and slowly began to bind the guy. When the man couldn't move at all, he was lifted into the air and made into a so-called air target, which Michael showed a great desire to hit with his fiery spear. To say Tyler was scared at that moment is to say nothing. But somehow, at the very last moment, despite his bound hands, he managed to create a thick layer of protection in front of him, and Michael's blow hit it. The contact was so powerful that pieces of that shield started flying around. Since it was Marina who had been holding Tyler, Tatiana came up to her and told her that it was too dangerous to continue, because the first thing to do was to stop the bleeding immediately, otherwise the girl could lose her life, and she would never tie anyone up again. But even though she was in great pain and at great risk of losing her life, the girl replied that she was fine, and said that it was more than bearable, but in fact it was far from it. In the end, even though Michael managed to break through a lot of the armor, Tyler still didn't take any damage. But at least the man recognized that it was really close, just a little bit more and the guys had succeeded in destroying it, but unfortunately not this time. I can't tell you how disappointed they were. It was an incredible amount of effort to organize something like that. Meanwhile, Frank was literally under a thick layer of earth, and next to him was an awakened man, who instead of attacking the defenseless guy, just stood there and watched him. Apparently he was waiting for the moment when Frank would have trouble breathing and beg for mercy. According to this guy, the rats that Frank looks up to easily adapt to life underground. Now based on the situation, it's safe to say that at this point Frank is weaker than a rat. Before leaving, the man wished him to start enjoying the tranquility of life underground. Tyler at this time began to do something terrible, namely, he rose into the air, built up a huge layer of ice behind his back, iced himself and began to strike Michael countless times with huge sharp pieces of ice. but at least for now the situation is under control. And the guy can also say with certainty that for some reason, his opponent has become several times stronger again. How it works is still unclear. Tyler's allies, meanwhile, have been watching from the sidelines, and the man of the land has no idea what's taking so long. Michael, in turn, despite the numerous attacks, decided to go on the counterattack. The ability to move extremely fast, it helps him perfectly. Now his main task is to get as close as possible, and choose the ideal position for an accurate throwing spear. Once such a goal was achieved, the guy maximized his spear's energy and threw it straight towards Tyler with tremendous force. From the side, it looked more like a fire round fired from some rifle than just any spear. For some reason, Tyler didn't even take it as an attack, because in his opinion, only a novice could throw his weapon away so easily. But in reality it wasn't that simple. When the man thought he could easily dodge it, he had no idea how wrong he was. In the end, the spear was homing itself, it went backwards, it reached its target, there was a huge explosion, after which it would be impossible not to lose your life. But given who the duel comes with, anything can happen. Basically, as expected, the opponent had taken a really big hit, but he was still alive. Michael was nervous to say the least, because he had to take some measures to finish the job, otherwise he might recover and start all over again. As soon as the boy started to act, the Earthman appeared in his way, and gave him a relatively light punch in the shoulder. Roughly speaking, it was a little warning that no one would call him to make the decisive blow, no matter how much he wanted to. The girls didn't like it to say the least, and they stood up for their hero, saying that it was too low of them to do such a thing, because as soon as Tyler couldn't win, everyone immediately attacked Michael with a mob. Unfortunately, in response they just laughed, and did nothing worthy. Meanwhile, Tyler himself finally came to his senses and once again paid tribute to his opponent. He realized that Michael is actually an awakened man who wields at least 2 powers. That's really not bad and deserves respect. No matter how the guy hit until the last, to keep his opponent in constant tension, and at one point he wanted to destroy him with just one blow, but unfortunately Tyler managed to block it. Also, he has 2 accomplices who are very much in the way. Let's summarize a little. The Earthman took Frank away, Marina is badly injured, and Tatiana cannot adapt to this stage of the fight. From this it turns out the only one who can fight is Michael. But no matter how it turns out, even if he is alone, for his sister, he will definitely defeat everyone. As suddenly at one moment, the guys notice that from under the ground, something is rapidly trying to get out, striking hard. In the end, when the floor cracked, Frank jumped out with great speed, and immediately attacked his assailant to remind him where rats should live. As a consequence, he managed to put his opponent on the floor without any problems, and at the same time hit him hard on the ground, after which he charged his fist, and before attacking, he said that he had already enjoyed the peace of lying deep underground waiting for a miracle. In the end, the blow was really powerful, but unfortunately not critical. Apparently this awakened one also has a large layer of armor that allows him to take even such a blow. Frank then went over to his contacts to see how they were doing and if they could fight. As soon as the guys lightly hugged, the system sent a new notification, in which informed that the possibility of communication between these two has been achieved. Against this background, Michael will receive numerous rewards, and most importantly a new skill called Blood Berserk, all of which should make things much easier. Meanwhile, Katerina announced that the evacuation of the building was almost complete, so they needed to get ready to move out as well. Tyler reacted rather harshly, and urged her not to tell him what to do. But the girl responded by saying that he was out of his mind, and it was time to calm down already. In the end it was decided that the Earthman should take Tyler out of here and let the crazies out, because it made absolutely no sense to keep them here. There were already a lot of them out there, and if they were needed again in the future, it would be no problem to catch new ones. Of course, the fact that the rivals made an escape attempt, Michael and his team did not like it much, so they decided to at least try to stop them. So that the bandits could lie down in peace, Katerina said that she would do her best to hold them off. By the way, this time she did not succeed very well, because the guys easily dodged her blows, and just a few seconds later they were standing right next to her. That's how even professionals miss, but as it turned out later, she did it on purpose. To hit the roof with his electric ball and make the whole place start to collapse. Now it's clear why they evacuated, for example, not to stay in this cave to live to a ripe old age, at best if you're lucky. Then, looking directly into the eyes of his opponents, Katerina began to apply some ability, from which frankly speaking they began to go blind, after which the girl just disappeared right in front of the guys. But it's nothing terrible, the main thing is that everyone is alive and well, even the collapse ended. When the guys turned back, they saw that at the moment their girls were under a pile of rocks, even scary to imagine what could happen to them under such a heavy weight. For example, Tatiana, because of her intense fear, did not even realize that Marina had saved their lives, and kept asking if she was still alive or not. At one point Marina got fed up with it, to put it mildly, so she urged her to stop doing it. When Tatiana opened her eyes, she slowly looked around, realized that everything was more or less normal, and apologized for the inconvenience. And she'd forgotten that her friend had such cool powers. Marina was touched that Tatiana had thrown herself at her to try to save her with her body, but it was better not to do that. Suddenly Marina began to get worse. The situation reached a point where the girl began to bleed through her mouth, which is usually a very bad sign. To help her, Tatiana tried to sit her down more comfortably. Suddenly she heard the boys looking for them and let them know exactly where they were. As soon as Michael heard the voice, she immediately used her power, and used it to scatter stones to free the poor girls from the rubble. Meanwhile, the hostages who had been sitting here at the beginning began to think of an escape plan, because a way out was visible in the distance. When everything was agreed upon, they made the decision to move out slowly, and tried to do so without being seen in any way. In the meantime, the boys were chatting among themselves about what to do next. The radar of the Awakened showed that they had not gone very far and had stopped at one place. Now it's not really clear why they ran away at all if they only gave themselves away for such a small distance. Maybe they were up to something. As suddenly the guys heard some noise, so they urged the girls to stay here until they checked what was going on there. As it turned out, the guys who planned their escape completely forgot that on the way they can meet zombies, and strangely enough ran into the bottom of the first turn, so they started screaming loudly, and at all speed to try to get away from them, otherwise it is unlikely to survive. On the way one of the guys said that we should go back to the Awakened as soon as possible, but unfortunately not everyone in this situation thought the same way. The man who was running behind said he had a better idea, grabbed the poor guy and threw him right into the hands of the zombies to save himself. Before taking his life, the man promised that he would surely find him and punish him for such a terrible act, even as a ghost. As the Awakened men heard the screams, they came much closer than the boys could have imagined. Michael actually saw how this guy had escaped. Of course, there is almost no desire to help such a person, because he does not deserve it at least. When the man came closer, he began to say that if the guys helped him, he would do anything for them, but whatever it was, money couldn't buy them. There was no problem with that. At this point, Michael wants to hear at least one decent reason not to destroy this unscrupulous person. To extend the time of his life, he immediately started talking about his sister, supposedly hinting that she could have stayed alive. After hearing this, the fellow began to press harder and asked for more details about it.